Good morning and welcome to the forum. My name is Malcolm Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral. It's such a blessing to see all of you here this morning on the windiest day. I was riding my bicycle and fortunately I came before sunrise and I think it's just getting windier the entire time. I don't think I'd be able to make it if I went right now. But it's a blessing to have you here this year. The cathedral's theme is bridges. And what we thought was that this is an election year, so much is happening. So there were a lot of people who said, let's have this be the year of the voice or the year of choice. Or we're recognizing a lot of anniversaries of the women's right to vote, African Americans' right to vote, 75th anniversary of the UN. But what we decided to do instead was to talk about bridges. So our theme this year is bridges. And how do we become reconciled with people who are different than us? And how do we become reconciled with people, personally and socially too. So it's going to be a work in the election year of reconciliation. And when they first invited me to be the Dean of Grace Cathedral, one of the first things I thought was, I would love to have Michael Murphy come to the forum. So this is actually kind of a dream come true for me. I have for a long time been very interested in what makes Northern California unique as a religious or spiritual place. And Michael Murphy is definitely at the heart of that story. And I'm really grateful that you're here today. Our guest co-founded Esalen over 50 years ago. He pioneered that concept in American culture and essentially launched the worldwide human potential movement that has changed the way we think about almost everything from science to psychology to our own relationships to what we eat, how we pray, and how we work. Many of the Eastern philosophies and metaphysical concepts introduced to the West via Esalen have since become commonplace, including yoga, meditation, and the mind-body connection. He is also the author of many nonfiction works and for 4 novels, including Golf in the Kingdom, which has been recognized as a classic since it was first published almost 50 years ago. Please join me in welcoming Michael Murphy.
Thank you.
So good to have you.
Good to be here.
Yeah,
Good to be here. It's a little bit like old home week because I was an altar boy in the Episcopal Church, and to come up here and serve at the altar was a big deal.
Yeah.
Bishop Block, and but the cathedral had a hard time getting finished, and but then came Bishop Pike.
Yeah.
And he took the town by storm, and the cathedral was finished, and many adventures, and so Esalen, when it moved up to the city, we started in Big Sur. How many of you have been to Esalen? Oh my God, this is old home week. Wow. Well, good to see you all again. I can't. I better be careful what I say here.
I don't think you can go wrong. But so you grew up in Salinas.
Salinas,
that's where you started.
Right.
And maybe you can tell us a little bit about what your childhood was. Your childhood was preparing you for something, and it was probably more evident now than at the time. But maybe you can talk a little bit about just what did you learn as a child that kind of helped you do these extraordinary things that you did?
There's a good question. I was the only member of my father's family that went to church. And my grandmother took me to the Episcopal Church. And I think the reason she chose it, because I think, I don't think she was Episcopalian, Anglican.
Yeah.
But it had the most social standing in Salinas.
Oh, right.
You see,
Yeah.
and that was important to her. And so I became an altar boy, and on summer vacations, I would think I would become an Episcopalian priest.
Right.
It kept coming up as a thought. So this cathedral became a big item.
Yes.
Because when Pike appeared, he
Right.
and I hit it off.
So what was your first impression of Bishop Pike? You'd seen him because he was a national figure. He was on television, on the radio, on the cover of Time magazine.
Yeah.
So what was he like when you first saw him?
Well, a dynamo,
Yeah.
and immediately we engaged, and this may seem far-fetched, but the two of us, at this point, Esalen had been going about 4 years.
Yeah.
So up on the desk, up in his office there, we spread things out on a desk agreeing that right now was a moment in world history, and certainly in Christian history, where pieces of the jigsaw puzzle were all over the place, including wisdom from the East. He'd be gotten to know Alan Watts, for example, and he kind of entered in to the so-called San Francisco Renaissance by one remove. So you had all of that culture that was pretty European and represented, say, by city lights and Ferlinghetti and all of this. So he had some of that, and the agreement that we had is that we should somehow conspire to try to put the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together. I remember that right at the beginning. And so when Dick Price and I, who really started the programs at Esalen full-time in 1962, I started to want to have a center in San Francisco. So because of Jim Pike, to have the programs here, which we did for 2 years. But when we got here, he had now, I think he had something to do with this. He had himself declared a heretic.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, I think he was happy for that.
They were debating about it, and they never voted that he was a heretic at that time.
Right.
But they were definitely murmurings, and he did. There's some bishops.
But he effectively said to me, if they don't kick me out, I'm leaving anyway. So he started the Bishop Pike Foundation and asked me to be one of the 3 trustees.
Wow.
And so this quite a number of adventures ensued. And he and Diana asked me to go with them over to Israel.
Wow.
And he was exploring the leadings to revisioning of Jesus and who Jesus was. And Jim felt he was the phrase he used, and those are a come runner, from come run community, as a social activist.
Yeah.
And I think Jim saw in Jesus very much the way he was and what he aspired for, to bring together for simple way to put it, the inner life and the outer life, because he was very active here. And we had black-white encounter groups here in the cathedral house, when it was standing there.
Yes, completely.
And we were starting to do that with George Leonard, who was then the West Coast editor of Look magazine. But in any case, so these sorts of activities were roaring along here at the same time as his interest in psychedelic drugs.
Right.
I don't know how many stories to tell.
I mean, this is I've been like I said. They said Malcolm, we'd like you to be dean of San Francisco, and I was like, Michael Murphy might come to see. But you were invited.
One of the first questions he asked me is, when he was at St. John Divine,
St. John the Divine in New York City.
In New York, he had taken upon himself to do an ordination of a number of priests with the exact recipe from the Old Testament. So he got a chemist to, the frankincense and myrrh, and et cetera. And I think there were 20 priests that were ordained in a giant ceremony. So it involved putting this oil on the forehead.
Yeah.
And so they did this, and when he got up to preach in that enormous cathedral, he felt suddenly as if he'd had 2 martinis. And it was a kind of clear elevation when he was very lucid, but expanded.
Right.
And he managed to bring off quite a sermon.
Wow.
And so they got back, and they were disrobing, and all 20 of them were stoned.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
All of them. And because of this ointment that he had made.
Yeah.
And so his theory then was that these ancient Jewish ceremonies, he claimed, were often influenced psychedelic.
Yeah, exactly.
So that kind of interest was going on. Now, for that day, in the 67, 68, this was, he was a popular speaker and would come down to Esalen.
Right.
And so he joined in to the zeitgeist. I mean, he really was. I mean, he was a tremendous trigger for a lot of what happened in those years here in Northern California, if we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Like when he came down to Esalen, what would he talk about? Like what would he lecture on?
Well, the very first time, he had a tremendous feeling for Paul Tillich.
Right.
And,
he put Paul Tillich in the window. So in the stained glass window, he
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah,
upstairs. Is
yeah.
that
You gotta
right?
have a look at it. It's a window up right up. It's
Wow.
the theologian window.
Well,
he has Soren Kierkegaard sitting in a purple suit,
Wow.
like reading a book.
Yeah, well,
all
see,
his
this,
favorites. Yeah.
you know, people have all sorts of ideas about what Esalen is.
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
go back to
Well,
that.
Paul Tillich was a figure.
Right.
Yeah, and he's tends to get lost in the narrative. But my teacher, who first triggered my turn away from what my family had hoped and what I thought I was going to be at Stanford, going to Stanford,
Right, exactly.
was Friedrich Spiegelberg. And Spiegelberg had taken over for Tillich in Germany in '33
Yeah.
when Hitler won the election.
Right.
He never came. Tillich was over here, and like Einstein and all, on the first hit list.
Yeah.
So he stayed here, and Friedrich took over his teaching in Dresden.
Right.
All right, and so they were very close. So because of this connection, and this is what Spiegelberg had opened the doors to the first central influences that led me to drop out of pre-med
Yeah.
and quit my fraternity. And my father, who was shocked by this, because they couldn't understand what a yogi was in 1950 in Salinas.
I know.
I mean,
know.
This is a tough town.
Yeah,
tough
completely.
town.
I have friends who grew
tough
up
town,
there
and my grandfather had delivered John Steinbeck, and Steinbeck was, if you read any of Steinbeck's books, you can get a feeling for that town.
Completely.
But now their son, the yogi. I mean, if I had any other thing I might have done, I mean, anything would have been understandable. To be a yogi was worse than dropping out. It was to disappear in front of it. Anyway, so my
I
father.
can completely imagine. I just
Yeah. So anyway, that was an experience.
And
And
so Paul Tillich.
so Paul Tillich was very close to Frederick and his theology.
Which I quoted Tillich in the sermon this morning already.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah,
Well,
so-
he came to Esalen in 1964, the second year, and we had quite a meeting. It was quite a collection of folks that were
must have been.
congregating, and the theme was the two sets of symbols of eternity.
Yeah.
The arrow in time, that the world is going somewhere, that the eschaton,
Right.
the
new being.
new being, and it started with Judaism,
Right.
and entered in Christianity. So those sets of symbols, and the circular symbols by Tillich, representing mainly the Hindu, Buddhist, and
Yeah,
Taoist
and for
traditions.
him, that was how he did theology. He said it was like you're always coming back to the beginning again.
But the great job ahead is the reconciliation of these two images or witnesses, dimensions, whatever. So when he lectured at Esalen, he afterwards we had a gathering, and he said, he looked around at us, 20 of us, and just in private, and had a drink, and he said, well, listen, everyone, was I fair to the East? Tillich asked.
Yeah.
And we said, well, it was great. And he said, I mean it. What you're doing here is right on this, the reconciliation of these two sets of symbols of eternity. Yeah. And this is very much up for us today again, because Esalen's going through yet another kind of quasi-rebirth.
Right.
I like to think of it, for those who've been to Esalen, as I don't know if you've heard about all this, there are a lot of rumors out. 99% of them are written by, frustrated novelists who, Esalen's a great place to project dreams into.
Right, it is.
But I can tell you for sure, the dominant metaphor right now for us is just getting our bearings to our North Star again.
Yeah.
We keep doing it. And there's been a through line at Esalen, but there have been meanders along the way and complexities which we embrace.
Right.
Okay.
So
With Tillich, that witness, I don't think has ever been stated more clearly by a major thinker as a puzzle or dilemma, a challenge.
Right.
But I had been influenced first. My first great influence through Spiegelberg was the Indian philosopher Sri Aurobindo.
Yeah.
And his vision, he'd been educated in the West, at Cambridge, et cetera, and he lived there from the time he was 7 to 21. But his work was founded on a vision of what you could call, I like to call evolutionary panentheism. And I got that phrase, evolutionary panentheism, the first time I ever read it was a set of crib notes for somebody who'd been to a Tillich lecture.
Oh, funny.
And he had used this.
Yeah.
And the idea, the panentheism, that the
Right.
divine is
Yeah.
transcendent and immanent,
Right.
and that necessarily then it's going somewhere. Evolution is a fact.
Right. Right.
It's a fact.
Yep.
But what is it going towards? And that's one of our main activities now at Esalen is the sponsorship of a series of programs to assemble it's a 3-volume work by our chairman, Jeff Kripal, and with a contract with the University of Chicago to do a 3-volume thing called The Superstory, which is a new look, a fresh look at how this vision is rising, but still on the margins.
Yeah. When Jeff Kripal's book came out about Esalen, what were you excited about, and what did you think? Oh, he didn't quite get that right.
Well, first of all, our history together is quite fraught with synchronicities.
Oh, great.
His and mine. I mean,
Yeah.
it's one of these friendships that you have to wonder who's writing the script.
Right. Exactly.
I tried to be practical and pragmatic and all,
Yeah.
but there have been coincidences and encounters and things that just force me to wonder who's writing the script for this place.
Right, exactly.
Because, believe me, we have meandered at times, but in the spirit of exploration. And with Jeff Kripal, this would take some time to tell the story, but he had written a book about Ramakrishna, the great Indian mystic, and very controversial. And that brought us together, and we hit it off. And he wrote that big book about Esalen.
Yeah.
He's now the chairman of our board.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and he, when Esalen started, I would have to say the field of inquiry that was the closest to us in terms of the number of people who were coming to us would be in psychology and psychiatry and all that. Now, it's religious studies.
Yeah.
Religious studies, some of you must know this, is really morphed since when I was at Stanford.
Right.
It was not very appealing.
Yeah.
I don't want to be too
Yeah.
bad boy here, but I mean, it was mainly retired Protestant ministers, and the young ones were in their 80s, and they, it was awfully
Right.
pale.
I completely understand.
Now, there are about 18,000, I believe. I know there's some.
Yeah, there's
I'm looking at
12,000 people came to the American Academy of Religion.
Well, there are 18,000 members of the Academy of
But
Religion.
12,000 came to San Diego in November for the annual
Well,
conference.
no, it's a dynamic
dynamic
filled
field.
with comparative religious studies.
Yeah.
You read Foucault and Derrida.
Right.
You have to know psychoanalysis. It's looking at how does quantum theory bear. It's a big dynamic field.
Yeah.
And I often think that if I'd been at, if religious studies had been like that at Stanford when I was there in 48 to 52, I might have
Taken a
followed
different
that
path,
path.
exactly.
But because philosophy, the analysts who were taking over, and this kind of a coup d'etat at Stanford.
Analytic philosophy is.
Oh yeah, and getting rid of the mystics and metaphysicians, as they said. But in any case,
But let's go back to Sri Aurobindo, because
Yeah.
you went to the class at Stanford.
Yeah.
It created a kind of a new moment in your life.
Yeah.
And then tell me about you started meditating at that point, right?
Right.
So how did you get the idea? I mean, you were meditating before many people
Yeah.
were there. Like, how were you exposed to it? And
well,
what
Malcolm,
did it do for you?
I've thought a lot about this. I'm not writing a book now, but I'm just writing my reflections.
Yeah.
So it's piling up. It's kind of like a coral reef of just thoughts and.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's not a memoir.
Right.
And
right.
But reflections. And the more I look back, this what I heard in Spiegelberg's course had been emerging in me in a naive way in my teens, and I was informed by being serving at the altar.
Exactly.
And so I was a very religious kid.
Yeah.
And I developed a primitive worldview that had a tremendous resonance with what I heard from Spiegelberg.
Yeah.
And then most particularly from his descriptions of Aurobindo. All right, that it was a panentheism. It was an evolutionary panentheism. The world is indeed going somewhere.
Right.
It starts with the Big Bang.
The omega
and,
point.
Well, Teilhard,
Yeah.
okay,
Well,
became
and
very
even,
important
Alfred
to
North
us.
Whitehead to process
And
the
Whitehead and Bergson.
Bergson, exactly.
And so there's been, I wrote a little essay called The Emergence of Evolutionary Panentheism, and I'm convinced that this thing has been kind of moving as a canon, unnamed canon, but for me, you have to start it with the German idealists who really embraced the idea of the world is going somewhere with Fichte, Schelling, Hegel, and that the Deus implicitus, the divine, is implicit in all matter, and this is before Darwin. This is Schelling, but slumbering spirit in the course of times become the Deus explicitus. So it maps beautifully straight onto Aurobindo.
Yeah.
And so a bridge was there. And I think it was an instant, overwhelming love affair when I, first with Spiegelberg, because I was in his class by mistake.
Right.
Yeah, I was a sophomore. And so they moved the class and they needed a bigger classroom. So he came out onto the stage and I'd heard about him. There were about 600 of us sitting there after lunch. And already a few were starting to doze. You can tell. This was a great time. If you had a course after lunch. And you could tell if they were dozing because they kind of have a spasm and they throw their. Anyway, so he comes out on the stage and tremendous sense of presence and didn't speak, and boy, that woke everybody up.
Yeah.
And Brahman, that was the first word, because it was the second lecture, and he had lectured on the Vedic hymns the day before, Brahman. And then he talked about the omnipresent reality of Brahman and everything. And then at the end, Atman. Atman is Brahman.
Yeah.
And after the lecture, walking back to the fraternity, I said, I'm never going to be the same again.
Yeah.
And I stayed in the class, and that was my baptism into the set of influences that have guided my life since and led me to start Esalen.
Yeah, and so you went to India to
Yeah, to Aurobindo's ashram.
Ashram. Tell me about what
Well,
that
it was
was
a year
like.
and a half,
Yeah.
and I must say it was a tremendous anchor for practice.
Yeah.
Very healthy place, a big sports program.
Oh,
so
great.
this is another influence on me. I mean, I was a sports nut as
I know,
a kid.
I love that about you.
And in terms of sports, my brother and I were spoiled rotten. I mean, oh my God, my father would take us up to the football games, and we'd play golf at Pebble Beach. And that has figured in a strange way into my calling. I feel this marriage of the physical life. But anyway, at this Aurobindo ashram, I ended up being, partially useful over there, meditating, but coaching the basketball team,
great.
teaching swimming, And then I introduced softball.
Oh, great.
Yeah. And the mother at the ashram, every now and then, you'd see her watching these sporting events. Anyway, that's a great grounding there. But I must say, I was vaccinated, I would say, for the second time in my life, because it had happened once before, on the dangers of cult.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, and because there were elements of that there.
Yeah.
And not prompted by, Aurobindo had passed away, he was dead, he was 1950, but the tendency to codify everything and to, as in most cults, there are X number of top sergeants. So I was scolded quite a bit, interestingly, by the Europeans there for meditating too much. And they were on my case. You should be out working. And I said, well, I'm coaching the teams here.
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't blame them for thinking I was, well, I wasn't working very hard. I was meditating.
Right.
And then other elements, and that fed into our notion my notion in starting Esalen to resist the impulses to cult. And in those years, the early 60s, I mean, there were dozens of these groups forming.
Yeah.
And some of them, we've had to live through the history of the bad things that happened out of that.
That's very true.
But being at the Aurobindo ashram anchored me on the good things and taught me some lessons about cult formation.
Right.
And the minute you invite in passionate practice, the need for order can result in this crystallization of practice.
Right.
And which contradicted much in what Aurobindo and the mother at the ashram, his co-worker, were for.
Yeah.
So they were working in a sea of contradictions for me and for others. And that's been one of the challenges at Esalen, a tension within our smaller and larger community.
Has there been a moment when you felt like you're getting too close to cult, and then you needed to make some?
Well, Dick Price and I shared. We had overlapping inspirations.
Yeah, that's.
But nobody could get between us.
Yeah.
So that, and then I became very close to George Leonard up here in 1965, Jim Pike.
Right.
I mean, the two people who prompted me primarily to start an initiative here in the city were actually George Leonard and Jim Pike.
Funny, yeah.
And
so this really is your home right here. I mean,
well,
it's a center,
here it was as a kid coming up here to
Same with me.
serve at the order.
Exactly.
And when you grew up here,
when coming from Davis in the Central Valley, I love that you mentioned the physical body, and I think that's an important part of your thought. That that it is I think oftentimes philosophers and students of the study of religion they become so disembodied, and I wonder if you can talk a little bit about golf in the kingdom and how that came into being, because it does seem connected to this.
Well, again, back to this thought, at times you have to wonder who's writing the script.
Yeah.
And so I had never thought to be a writer. And my brother was the designated writer, and the family decided I was going to be a doctor, like my grandfather.
Yeah.
And so when I came to Stanford as a pre-med and all this, so I hadn't thought of being a writer. But in any case, when I sat down to start writing, when I was 39, and I had moved up here, I wrote this book. How I ever got into this, I'll never know. But Norman Mailer, says every aspiring writer, God gives one free one. And that was my free one, this first book. And, it has sold more than 1 million copies. It's in 10 languages. And they resurrect me again and again.
It does,
because it's opened doorway after doorway into a kind of underground life in the world of sport.
Right.
So, for example, I've lectured in the Superdome to 1,000 golf pros.
Yes.
And they asked me to speak, and they had a guy introduce me, and almost acting as my interpreter. I think they thought I might speak Gaelic or something.
Completely.
They,
That's great.
but there they were scribbling away, but talking about what the easiest way for me to explain it to some audiences is everybody's read Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Is that the mugglehood that dominates
Yes.
the thinking about sport, but these wizards emerge.
Right.
And I've taken confession, I would say, from hundreds of golfers who want to tell me if I'm on a golf course and know this golf in the
Yes,
kingdom, it's so popular
completely.
that they will tell me their latest mystical or occult experience.
Right.
So I've developed quite a collection of this.
Yes.
So it's the varieties of
religious experience,
on
but
golf
for-
courses. And no, I feel I am the person who really discovered that golf is actually a mystery school for Republicans. You see, and and they don't have the language for it.
Right.
But
right.
it's also in football. And just for example, right now I'm an old friend and close friends with Pete Carroll, who's the coach
Right,
of the
of course.
Seahawks.
Yeah, exactly.
So I announced my divorce from the 49ers
Yeah.
and embraced the Seahawks now. But I love my former
Yes, exactly.
wife, the
Yeah,
49ers.
exactly.
But anyway, so he had been inspired by a mutual friend anyway, and as a graduate student, and had read Golf in the Kingdom. So many of his players come up with words that his teams tend to be about 85% black.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of players coming up with words that do not exist in English for these powers. They have
Right,
superpowers,
right, yeah.
essentially. So now, I'll make this brief. Sri Aurobindo kept a record of his own yoga, which was not meant for publication, but was resurrected mainly by two Americans who live over in the ashram still,
Yeah.
Peter Hees and Richard Hartz. And embedded in this record are some 2,000 terms, which have been extracted by Richard Hartz, and I have a copy of this, and I'm sharing with the football players.
Right, right.
Because now, to find our way to a language that can better map what's actually happening. Our experience is out ahead of our language.
Yeah.
And I can give you some examples. For example, would this be useful? I'll just give
Yes,
you one
completely.
example. When you get into these high-level sports, and it's the same in high-level creativity anywhere, in music or wherever, you're called upon to do things that no one's ever done before.
Right.
I mean, if any of you love football, and if any of you have ever been on the field, it is something. You don't want to run out on the field because you will return a paraplegic. I mean, they're
Right.
running at full speed and everything. It is a demand, a challenge, sacrifice is made. They're training. They become, as it were, shamans and yogis, but just to play this game.
Right, right.
And no one's told them that they're going to experience these things. So so in a locker room, here's the kind of thing that happens. This is a story. A player comes off the field, and he's had this opening and he turns to his friend, his buddy. They're getting undressed to go in the shower, and he says, "You and I are one." And the friend, this is a story that actually happened. The friend said, "We're buddies. We are buddies." He said, "No, we're not buddies. You and I are one," like this. And he looks at this, and there is some homophobia in these locker rooms.
Right.
So now he's a little worried. You and I are one.
Right.
And he looks around, and he's like this. And so somebody yells across, "Get the guy in the showers. He took a big hit out there," And so here he is.
Yeah.
Now, if I'd said Atman is Brahman, this would have to be a long conversation with this guy who never heard of such a thing. Atman is Brahman.
Yeah.
So this is a kind of an example. So here's another one. I don't know how much is useful here, but I get a constant input on these things they cannot name. So if you're a wide receiver, running at this incredible speed, and you have a guy covering you.
Completely.
And now they set up, Seattle has this great long passer. And and how they do this, say a 40, 50-yard pass, right on his hands. So the only way the defender now can match him is to watch his eyes.
Right, completely.
And you have to stay on his eyes, because if you turn and look,
Yes.
he is going to spurt out away from
Exactly.
you. So he has to be glued to you like this. They're running as fast as they can. So this one person, and it started to be observed, never looks back, but his hands catch the ball, and he has the
Without looking.
a disadvantage. So how do you name this? So they come up with words for this. So to talk to now, so this is the interrogations I do with these.
Right,
All right.
right.
Now how? Okay. So I'm just going to tell you some stories here. I can. It says I see from the back of my head, and you get this kind of thing. All right. So the coaches, when they look at this, they say, "Now look, that's a great metaphor, but you don't have an eye on the back of your head. So tell us what actually happened."
Right, right.
And and I can give you several examples in this department. They say, "No, I see it.
Yeah.
But you have no eye back there, you know." So there it is. Okay. In the yogic language, now Aurobindo himself had a word. He made up a lot of words, a lot of terms. What he called the circumconscious. We talk about the superconscious.
Right.
The subconscious.
Yes.
Okay, the circumconscious. And the common example would be you're sitting in a movie theater and you think someone's looking at you, and you turn around and by God, somebody is staring at you. So this is a common kind of thing, and but it develops into this intense experience at times, where you can see, and the challenge to you is to do this. Another example of a famous broken field runner, MacArthur Lane was famous for. Okay, they practice these plays, and you have to get in behind the guards, and you're pulling out, and you're running, and so he would often be right in there. They have a good, beautiful play set up to make 10 yards, and he breaks the play, goes sideways, and runs 50 yards.
Yeah.
So now they're in the coach's room studying the film, saying, "MacArthur, look, the play was set up. Why did you do this?"
Yeah.
And he said, "Because I see the field from above." They say, "MacArthur, now that's a nice metaphor, but tell us, you saw something, didn't you?" He said, I saw it, and he insisted. Okay, you see, here's the dilemma. And I was interested about a month ago, I don't know, somebody sent me that Billie Jean King kind of came out and to say that she starts, because her brother is a major league pitcher, Randy Moffat, that she has been seeing the field from above. But she couldn't explain it. So anyway, if you start to expand this, you find this is a window, a laboratory, emerging in plain sight in front of the world, and we're watching this happen, but not able to see everything. So it's a hiding in plain sight. So to develop a language, to have words for these things, and but we love sport because we feel it and we know.
I know exactly what you mean. I mean, that sense of intuition, like, why did you do that? I mean, and I've felt those feelings. I mean, and you're right, it's such an acute moment of stress and tension, or, I mean, absolutely everything is being, I mean, that's one of the things I love about sport is that there's, like, how many times are you and I going to do something that's absolutely our absolute strongest effort? Do you know what I mean? But in that setting,
it's amazing. It's amazing. And it's this extra dimensional thing we enter into. It's another set of graces given. But we need a worldview adequate to the graces given to us. So we walk around, you know, we're blind to what's given to us often. And a field that I have gotten interested in later are people who play in symphony orchestras. Yeah, that's interesting. And now nobody's really gone after this in the way I have with sport. And so I've started to whenever I find someone who has played in a symphony orchestra,
Yeah.
and that's interesting.
It
Oh,
is.
it's really interesting. And so again, the story I always get is, well, yeah, you're right, but what do you think that is? And so if I put a name on it, for example, one is that a dilemma a lot of people playing in these big orchestras have is to how do you stay synced up with the conductor?
Right, right.
So if you watch, I've been studying, some of them will take their eyes off briefly to get a beat, but then they read their music going along, although half of it's memorized, but still, anyway.
It's partly memorized. I thought was the wonderful thing about music too, is like you kind of let yourself go into it, and you're sometimes more effective by not being so programmed to the notes.
I know, and then you have at times when the symphonies go into the zone. This would be, and then and at the end when the audience comes to its feet. Let's say they've heard Beethoven's Ninth 100 times. But this one was just, whoa, and the players know it. What happened? So you can actually get closer to it and find out that it's fascinating what happened. So getting close to these Sidhis in the raw, in these immense theaters.
Yeah, you're right. It's a wonderful thing to. I just never thought of like musicians in that way, but it's just like great mystical beings who are in connection with each other in profound ways that we can't recognize.
No, it's incredible. And we found some colleagues now in this. We're doing a thing in March with Tanya Luhrmann, who is a professor at Stanford of anthropology.
Oh, yeah, right. She did the work on the religious people,
the vineyard people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and before that, well, she got a $3 million grant from Templeton to do a cross-cultural study in Africa, Latin America, China, and India. It's just finishing now. Now, here's interesting where she's going with this. William James would be in love with her. And Abe Maslow, she is doing a complete end run around a lot of the strictures of how to go after some of this voices thing.
Right.
Now, on the face of it, it's a cross-cultural study that to look again at how the West treats children who hear voices.
Right.
And typically be right on Ritalin, right with counseling and everything.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right at the prescription.
Okay. In Black Africa, voices are treated much differently than they are in India or in Latin America or in China. Now, this is a big study.
Yeah.
But it's a kind of Trojan horse for, you listen to someone who hears voices, pretty soon they do a lot of other amazing things.
Yeah.
So we're having we're engaged now, and I really want, as part of our new set of initiatives, to work with her and her postdocs on pushing this way down the field. And so we've started this project already. And what's interesting, again, as in sport, when you start to look around, there's a lot more of this happening, but it isn't valued. Even in religious traditions, seriously, that I never heard of this stuff in growing up as an Episcopalian. I just didn't. But I was open to certain things. But I would say every culture, even the most enlightened ones, set you up for a thin spectrum of the graces that are given. The graces given to us are much broader than is generally assumed. And certainly growing up in Salinas, where I'd have to say I was spoiled rotten by most traditions. But nobody ever heard of these things.
Yeah. It's
And
like
I had a
band of what counts as
well,
reality.
I had a couple that I had to manage myself. It was too scary even to tell my parents. I was able to manage it. For example, this one that was on the time I was 9 years old, and I found later a lot of people have this. As a kid, I'd look in the mirror, and it would occur to me that that's not me. This would be my perception.
Yeah.
That's not me. And then I would panic, and I would sneak outside and go running to get myself back down.
Yeah.
So I learned to manage this thing. So when I got to Spiegelberg, and through, Purusha Prakriti, that Atman is Brahman. Okay, intrinsic to that, in the practice of meditation, and we didn't do this at Salinas in 1930. You say dropping thoughts. What's left? You drop every thought.
Yeah.
You're not your name.
Right.
You're not niti, niti, niti.
You're not your feelings.
And so instead of panic, it's liberation.
Right.
And learning that, not only did that experience go away of looking in the mirror, but it produced a kind of instant ecstasy in me. It was a great meditation exercise. And Spiegelberg actually talked about it. He said, it's a tough one, but try, looking in a mirror, and you're not that image.
Yeah.
It's just one way in.
Well, Spiegel is mirror in German, yeah?
Really?
Yeah. Spiegelberg,
No,
like
I didn't know.
mirror mountain. Yeah.
Really?
There's Spiegel like
Well,
the
that's
mirror.
interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Well, that was one of the first doorways in for me of instant connection with Sanskrit and these words and these practices. Because here is this vision of an evolutionary unfoldment, but you need practices to
Right,
actualize
you do,
it.
completely.
But now, what's happening is there's been an explosion of these practices, and Esalen's brokered so many of them.
Yeah.
But practices without vision can lead, for example, now in
that's
Wisdom 2.0, the Wisdom
Yeah,
2.0, which is a
exactly.
good thing.
Yeah.
And it was primarily started by one of our Esalen staff. It's now all over the world. But these 2-minute meditations, say at Google, they do this now. And, you get that. It's a good thing. You can relax. But pretty soon it's enough. And it has served for a lot of people to vaccinate them against going deeper.
Right.
So you can vaccinate yourself with shallow practice.
Yeah.
This is where you need a vision to stretch you out. And the marriage of vision and practice, to me, is very fundamental. And this is, right now, we want to do better at Esalen to promote this sort of
Yeah.
stuff.
And I can imagine it's hard to get that right balance because you're right. You want some people to be introduced.
Exactly.
But you're right. You can get a surface to shallow level. And,
You can exactly. I mean, we, a lot of effort in our special ops, the Green Berets and the SEALs.
Oh, yeah.
And now they're all doing this stuff.
Yeah.
But to what end?
Right, exactly.
I mean, Hitler.
Right.
I mean, you can get.
Designed ritual experiences that would.
No, you can get these empowerments, but how are they going to be channeled and used? Now, for most people in mainstream America, it's just to open our eyes to these graces that are being given.
Yeah.
And now there are immediate things, say with a friend of mine who is a leading counselor and therapist for autistic kids in the valley.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of, more than usual amount of autism and Asperger's in the kids in the valley. So I hear through the window she offers me into this that the parents will be meditating. They will do things, but it's very instrumental. And let's say you're at Google and you're working
Right.
20 hours a day.
Right.
And you are go on these projects. And, you're doing your meditations to help you. But you're going straight to hell helped by these cities.
Right, exactly.
So, so that's to be negotiated.
Yeah.
And we have to look at that. And I think that's the privilege of having this long history that some of us who've been around 60 years in this.
And it's kind of back to the cult thing too. I mean, it's just like a societal level cult of just like workaholism and meritocracy. And one of our practices at Grace Cathedral for the forum is we take questions.
Great.
And so I've noticed that some people have started to write questions, and Rebecca Nessel's collecting them.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you about Alan Watts, about just what your experiences was like with him. When I was a little boy, my mother would listen to his tape recordings in the car, or not in the car because we didn't have in the car. We just had radio in cars, but she would listen to the tape recordings in our house. And I wonder just, what your experiences were of him, and
Well,
what your take on why he resonated with
Yeah,
people.
he was so close to us. I think you could say of Alan, like people said of Oscar Wilde,
Yeah.
that half his work was lost in conversation. That's what Yeats said about Oscar Wilde. He never wrote it down. And now he's kind of reincarnating. His voice is appearing
Yes,
in these
exactly.
movies.
Right.
Like Her. Do you know that movie? And Scarlett Johansson?
Yeah, and
is
music too.
And his, he, for me, was a lyrical channeler of wisdom. He was not primarily a meditator or a meditation teacher. And he did, suffer from drinking too much
Right,
and the rest. But he had a huge imprint here in the Bay Area in the 50s, because on the radio.
Right,
and
exactly.
then TV, he was, you knew,
Yeah,
I guess,
exactly.
a huge influence.
Yeah.
And extraordinarily generous. And so he was a boon to us. In fact, Esalen started with two, we never advertised, it was two mailing lists. One of them was his mailing list, and the other one was something called the Sequoia Seminar. I don't know if you'd remember that. That was led by Harry Rathbun, who was a professor at Stanford, and his wife, and influenced by Gerald Hurd. And Huxley and Hurd were huge influences on us at Esalen. And so we started with those two mailing lists. So Alan was tremendously generous and always there as a friend, and has enduring language. It's now, you can get these tapes, and there's a kind of right now a new Alan Watts craze going on. I'm very aware of it.
Yeah,
Yes, and it's interesting. It's like if I saw Esalen as a kind of a repertory theater, or let's say, as a kind of a symphony or something. So, some, Bach will come in and out of favor even to some,
Right,
even
exactly.
the greatest. And then every now and then someone you never listen to much, say Mendelssohn, will come in, and he'll have 2 weeks of 2 months. Or
Right,
so
being in
we
the
have this at
spotlight.
Esalen with this these tides in the affairs of men and women. So Alan's on a comeback right now.
He is. I hear him, even just in popular music, I hear his, like they have like a little recording, like a little dub of
Oh, really?
Alan Watts.
This I haven't heard.
Yeah. I'll have to send it your
No,
way.
this is a subject in itself, and why these moods returning.
Yeah.
And what is that? If you look at our Geist, let's say our cohort, our demographic, and you must feel that here. I mean, it's things come in and out of fashion, sometimes for reasons.
Yeah.
And this would be another conversation. Why does this happen?
Yeah.
And I think it's like our moods. Why do we suddenly have a yearning for such and such?
Right.
Yeah,
It's
I'm
the
missing.
cycles. It's the big cycles. So
Okay.
we're gonna have to speed it up because we have.
Okay.
Can you tell us? Oh, I wanted to ask about this too. Can you tell us about Gorbachev and ending the Cold War? True story. So I guess this is what the Soviet American dialogue.
My wife, Dulcie Murphy, is somewhere here.
Yeah.
There she is. Well, she is has kept this thing together now for 40 years.
Yeah.
Us and the Russians.
Right.
Okay, I went there first in 1971, so half a century ago, looking for friends and allies we knew existed in what they called hidden human reserves. It was their own human potential movement going on right in the middle of the Marxist thing.
Right.
So we met the people, and I met the famous telepathist, Karl Nikolaev, and we conducted the first telepathic experiment between Moscow and San Francisco. He actually got the first thing I sent.
Oh, great.
I could tell you details, but it was the first and the last.
Yeah.
But so one thing led to another. In 1980, we defied the boycott of the Olympics. Remember,
Right,
Americans. It was not as brave as some people thought, because the guy running the boycott was our personal friend.
Yeah.
Anyway, and so we struck up a set of relationships, and through people like Dulcie and then our directors, one thing led to another. It became more and more political, and believe it or not, before long we had intelligence officers from America and from the KGB together at Esalen.
Wow.
in the hot tubs, and I wrote a little essay about one of the things called Russian-American friendship is an altered state, because one day down at the big house there, the Murphy house, so we're doing one of these groups, and the magic can happen in these groups, and now nobody would tell you then, no Russian would say, I'm in the KGB, but we knew.
Yeah,
We knew.
yeah.
Okay, so here comes this guy, and says, Mike, it's urgent, I got to talk to you. He was an American intelligence officer. So we go out on the deck, and he says, you know that guy over there? And he points to one of these KGB guys. He said to me, he's an actual human. And it's like the story in the locker room. It's like the story in the locker room.
Exactly.
And with these athletes, I said, a good guy. He says, no, I don't care if he's a good guy or not. He's an actual human. And right away I thought, oh boy, I've seen this before. He's in an altered state.
Yes.
All right, now for him, this is a challenge. If he goes home telling his boss that he's in love with this Russian, they say, goddamn Esalen, they've turned him.
Right,
It's
completely.
it's a KGB
Yes,
operation.
exactly.
Now we're getting this right now. There's been a number of friends who've begun to doubt, why do we stay close to the Russians? Even now, it's a second mild wave of McCarthyism that's hitting, at least in Marin County. And there are a lot of, I'm sorry to say this, but disappointed Buddhists that it hasn't worked out.
Right.
70 and 80 years old, and they now they're sour about Russia, and they know nothing about Russia.
Yeah.
Okay, so here are these things. So all this is happening down there. So to make a very short, long, and complex story, having brokered a number of activities that have lasted, like getting these cosmonauts and astronauts together, was our idea.
Yeah.
Rusty Schweikart, Apollo 9, met Leonov in the National Hotel. We brokered this thing.
Oh, that's great.
Formed this association. Anybody who's been in space now belongs to that organization. We started it.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and so more and more people in the Central Committee and even in the Politburo, we got to know them.
Yeah.
And then Claiborne Pell, who was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, became our friend, and so we'd go jogging with him, and he'd say, every time you're here, you need to jog with me because you're telling me different things than my minders. Now, who were his minders?
Right.
His minders were the briefing he got every Monday, chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, who tend to be very patronizing at times
Right.
to these Congress and senators,
Yeah.
and telling them what's what. And so one day we're out jogging. He says, Mike, I want a raw answer instantly from you.
Right.
He says, how long will communism last? And I instantly said, well, 3 years. Now this is this is 86, and Gorbachev had appeared.
Right.
And he says, well, they're telling me 50 years, my minders, and don't trust Gorbachev. This is from his CIA guys.
Yeah.
All right, now there's a lot I could tell. If I ever write a memoir on this one, this is really interesting. And so some years passed. Now in between it, Esalen,
Right.
this crazy place I started at the end of nowhere, bringing Boris Yeltsin.
Right.
The people around Yeltsin wanted us. Now there's another story on this, because you could argue it took a 1-2 punch to end the whole thing over there, because Gorbachev thought you could fix communism. Yeltsin, on the trip with us, saw you can't fix this thing. He was blown away by what he saw here.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to Claiborne Pell. So now these years I'm jogging along, and it's really imprinted in me. He said, Mike, remember when I asked you how long it would last?
Yeah, right.
Well, isn't it interesting? You were right and the CIA was wrong. Okay, now what makes it relevant now is we're in the same situation.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because we're not close to the Putin circle. We're not. But through what Dulcie does and what I love to do in Moscow when I go there is go slumming.
Yeah.
I go out, and Dulcie lets me go slumming out there. So I go around to bars, I talk to people, and I can generally get about 20 good talks about where are you and what you're doing. And we have lived through this extraordinary transformation of that country.
Exactly.
From, oh, God, I mean, first of all, they're much better off than they ever have been, and et cetera. So, so that's a overview, the long arc of our relationship to be witness to all this. Now, Gorbachev himself was a hero that should live in, he will live in world history as a transformational figure. Yeltsin did what he did. The good things, what he did, and the bad things.
Right.
And now here we go again, coming apart. Here was the Cold War ended miraculously with, I think, 3 people were killed in some skirmish once, but no nuclear accidents so far.
Yeah.
So always this immense underground of connection in the world of what you would call the human potential, hidden human reserves. And just to finish this, we now, transpersonal psychology has a bigger following in Russia than in the United States.
Really?
Yeah, and there'll be these events in Moscow with Stan Grof, those of you who know his work, and holotropic breathing, and you'll have 500 to 1,000 people doing this. The big things, and Vladimir Maikov, who's one of the leaders of the transpersonal psychology. So that bridge is still there.
Yeah.
And the world is radically different. They have the internet, they can see, but why have our country gotten down and far apart? And so it's still a work in progress.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to do it again, what we went through with Gorbachev.
Here's a quick question. Are you going to write football in the kingdom?
No.
Okay, good. Can you talk about the phases and evolution of Esalen over the years? Where did the organization go astray, and how has it gotten back on track?
Well, how have I sinned? Let me count the ways. By 1970, all of us agreed we got to confess our sins in public. I mean, it doesn't work to have LSD every Sunday.
Yeah.
Let's just use this as an example. Tim Leary was a friend. He and Richard Alpert, who became Ram Dass, gave me.
I was just at his funeral like 2 weeks ago.
You were?
Yeah, I did the prayer. Oh, one of the prayers.
You're kidding.
Yeah, it was really beautiful.
Where? Over there?
At the Unitarian.
At the Unitarian Church?
Yeah, here in SF.
Good for you.
Yeah, it was
wow.
nice.
Well, so
LSD.
just to say, I essentially, aided by John Levy, who was very important to us, made a peace with the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, in 1965. And if you can believe it, I just use this as an example of how we've had to do course corrections, because Esalen was super hot right then, and people were getting turned on a lot.
I can imagine.
And we knew we were being observed.
Right.
And so the head of the Northern California DEA actually lectured me on the Fourth Amendment, against search and seizure.
Yeah.
And I didn't know this, but there's a great body of constitutional law that an innkeeper cannot go into your hotel room and go searching your room.
Yeah.
And he said to me and to John Levy, they can sue you to death. You can't do it. You leave that to us. But what you have to do is, and you know who they are, you have to tell those dealers down there to get out. They knew. So it was one of my great moments when I confronted Big Bad Bill.
Yeah.
He had a big black hat, a muscular guy. And, so I was going to have to tell him he could never come back.
Right.
And the word got out. So a gathering formed when they saw Big Bad Bill meet little Mikey, me. And so we sat down. It was a hoot. And we sat down. There were about 20 people watching us. And I said, look, Bill, you can't come back anymore. So he looked at me like this, menacing.
Yeah.
And I said, you know why? And I said, we're being observed now.
Yeah.
And you know by whom.
Yeah.
So he looked at me and he said, thanks. And he walked out and left. And I got promoted by the community that I could actually do something useful. But nobody believed it. But then we had to really work to get law and order on that front. Now, that's an example, because then as time went on, Stan Groff lived and worked at Esalen. So we kept alive the conversation, and now, in recent years, actually the big meeting was in '98, so as if we shoved the coals to the back of the hearth for what was learned, what can be kept.
Right.
And Michael Pollan's book.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, well, he describes all this. And,
that's right.
And so now, one thing after another is starting Johns Hopkins, et cetera. So it's finding it's tiptoeing its way back into the culture. Now, the same with a lot of the stuff at Esalen like this. For example, these encounter groups. Anyway, this maybe isn't the place. I could tell some very funny stories about what happened here.
Yeah.
In Gresham Hall
Tell
next
one
door.
story about what happened here, but then we've got to go because
No, but it's okay. But anyway, some of these encounter groups, they didn't work.
Yeah.
It was too much. And winnowing this out of our program led to a lot of controversy at Esalen. Yeah. The idea being, Murphy, you've lost your guts. You have no more courage. We're exploring the edge. And I said, guys, go explore it somewhere else.
Yeah.
You're ruining our meals here. Right. I mean, it was too much.
Yeah.
So this constant winnowing has gone on. Now, it's gone on in the general culture. I would argue, I mean, maybe, I'm looking at you, Robert, you would disagree, but the great social history is yet to be written about the maturing of wisdom around these practices. Right. There's a lot of wisdom's been shared. And Northern California is you could see it as a pilot laboratory for the whole world.
Right.
Is learning now about how you gather this stuff from the entire global village, these yoga systems, these shamanic practices, these psychedelics, and et cetera, into coherent practices that really do transform you, rather than lead you out in these ecstatic trips, and you come back, you get in trouble, you do crazy things. Right. Well, anyway, that's a...
and I love that. You're exactly right. It's just like, how do we continue to grow?
And right now, that's what we're trying to do, is to take another reorientation to our North Star right now at Esalen.
I have like 50 more questions for you. I want to sit and talk to you for the next 7 hours.
Well, we'll figure out a way to do it.
Yeah, but it's next week. Alan Jones was going to be interviewing Avshalom Weinstein, the co-founder of Violins of Hope, and Jake Heggie, the composer of a major new chamber work honoring the violins, a collection of instruments played by Jews in the concentration camps during World War II. It should be really, really excellent. Alan's so good at this. I'm going to actually be at St. John the Divine next Sunday.
Wow.
So, yeah. And of course, you're welcome to join us at Cora Eucharist upstairs at 11 o'clock. I'll be preaching the sermon if I get up there in time. Also, if you can make a gift on your way out, that would be very helpful. And I'm so grateful for you for saying
Malcolm,
yes and coming on this windy day. It's a day full of the Spirit. That's what I've got to say.
Great.
Thank you, Michael.